Welcome back, everyone.
Good to be back.
I'm here with Will.
Hello.
Are you good?
Yeah, not too bad. Can't complain.
Yeah.
Some would say 100%, but I wouldn't because I don't want to put it in the sway jar. So
I think we did better last week.
I think so. I think I got one.
You got one?
And I felt a couple of times I was about to, then paused.
Yes. Yes. You did good. You did good. All right. Today, we're going to talk about the family of God.
Yeah.
Here we go.
It's the new take, right? They've tried through people, like singulars.
We tried singulars. It didn't work.
Teamwork makes the dream work, right?
Absolutely. Family is perfect. Everyone knows that. I have 3 kids. My family's perfect order. Every parent's like booing me right now because
Also lying in the house of the Lord, I feels,
yeah, it's more of a studio. So coming to the concept of family and being part of God's family as a larger picture of the family of God, this is a step forwards.
Yeah.
So God always takes people where they're at, moves them forwards. This is the whole Old Testament story to the picture of Jesus, which is God meets them where they're at and moves them forwards.
Takes us as he finds us now.
Yes.
Tries to improve us little by little.
Yeah.
Which I think is good because if God came down and said, you're right, Will, these are all your faults and there's many of them, and rolled out the scroll, and it's like, you need to fix these before we can be friends.
The end of the day.
It would be just like, if you came over, right, you'd be like, oh, well, just like, do away with me now, whatever you've got to do.
Kill me
there's
now.
no way I could manage that. Yeah.
So when we see some of these challenging things in the Old Testament, it's not that God's approving, it's that God is meeting people where they're at. And he's taking them forwards. We move from, people were sacrificing children regularly. God hated that. We moved to animals. We moved to ultimately to Jesus being the one sacrifice for all of humanity.
Yeah.
He gives himself and says, I am the end of this sacrifice and into a whole new life. So God's taking people on this journey and we're part of that.
Yeah.
So family is the next step in this journey of God laying out the human project, showing us what he wants to see happen. He wants to put the lonely in families.
So I guess, we sort of, the previous section, which would have really been, you're talking about Genesis in 2 parts. So you're talking Genesis 1 to 11. And that's the setup there. And at 11, that's when, Noah had failed. He was the new Adam, didn't do such a great job through one person there. I mean, he was probably better than me. But then that ended in the Tower of Babel and everyone getting separated out. And then then we have some genealogies, which I'm sure people love.
Oh, thrilled.
Oh, that's good. Although there is an interesting fact about genealogies, right? So people do look at it and they're like, oh, well, the young earthers, should we call them? So I don't know how old the earth is. I don't know.
So you're not a young earther? A young earther would be someone who would say
it's like 6,000 years old.
Earth is 6,000 years old.
I would err on saying it's older.
Tough to make a case for that. I've watched a few YouTube videos. Not so convincing.
Yeah.
Hey.
But so
choose your own adventure.
Yeah. One thing they look at is potentially, you can count the genealogies all the way back to Adam, and then that's how you can calculate the age. But in the ancient cultures, generally they counted like the father. So was this person's father, was this person's father. It's probably like the most important person in that timeline. So they would count the important people in the timeline. Yep. So there could be generations of people, of fathers and sons, between like, this guy's the father of this guy in between there. So it could be a lot longer than we actually assume. So,
and it was an interesting point that Shane Willard made about the lunar cycles, which made a ton of sense to me.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that. That was a good one. Huh?
That put to bed that for me was like, what about these guys who are like 900 years old? And people are putting that in their calculators, trying to calculate the length of the Earth, the age of the Earth. And it's like, well, if you count bilunar cycles as years, which they would have, then Noah was probably like 57 years old. Yep. Which I'm thinking, okay, the Bible is better than I thought it was. Yeah. And that could trip some people up. But
and I think that just shows our biggest, like one of our big problems with the Bible is, and we said it in the first week, is when we look at it, we expect to see a science book. This is exactly how I did it. This is the order. This is what people make up were. This is your line to you. And then that's when we miss so much richness.
Yes.
I think.
Well, it wasn't written to me.
No.
It was written for me in the picture of God, but it wasn't written to me. It wasn't a letter to me in the 21st century.
And it's that idea of there's only one meaning. It means what it means.
Yeah.
Like there's different application to us, but it has one meaning. We can't try and pull out different meanings to suit our lifestyle or the things we want to do.
Yeah. And I can't just throw my worldview on it and say that's what it means.
Yeah. And we do that, right? Some people do that. Say, oh, well, God never mentioned this. Jesus never said this was bad. We didn't need to because no one thought it was good at the time. Like maybe if people he mentioned the things that people thought were acceptable that weren't acceptable.
Right. He didn't talk about child sacrifice.
Yeah. So like,
because by then people knew
it was wrong.
That was a bad thing.
Well, it was the Valley of Death, right? That's where they used to chuck all of the babies' bodies and stuff.
So, yeah. So we've got to come to the Bible with our humble hats.
Yep.
Ready to learn and take off our
Western eyes.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we'll enjoy it more that way. I know I've found a lot more richness and enjoyment.
And maybe relax a little bit more, like not needing it to fit into my Western eyes.
Yeah.
But taking it for what it is. And
that goes back to like that idea we spoke about last time was, the list of sins. If I look at life as just a list of things I can't do, then there's things I failed at, and it just makes life so much harder. But when I actually look at it from the grace side, God's done this for me, and I get to change because of Him. It makes life a lot easier. But I think we're going past what this week was supposed to be talking about, right?
Okay, so we're talking about family.
Excited. Yeah, family.
Family of God. I'm the youngest of 11 children.
Mum and dad are Catholic, right?
Yes.
From a Catholic background.
Definitely Catholic background. A fair few Catholics in my family. A few priests and nuns, I hear.
Oh, yeah?
That's what I hear. So that's interesting. Big families all around. I guess back in that generation was fairly common, was to have big families. Maybe not that big.
Yeah, my mum and dad, there's 6 of us.
Yep.
So 4 kids.
That was fairly common.
Yeah, I think so. These days, you're lucky. Like, I've got no kids. We've got a dog.
The richer people get, the less kids they have. But
the more career focused, like, I'll have it later on. The world tries to tell you can have it all. But then when you really look at it, biology tells you you've only got so many eggs.
Yes, certain amount of time.
As a woman, you've only got so much time before you can.
We're going into like dangerous territory now, aren't we? We're going to get some comments. I'm not a doctor. But family of God. So God chooses a man. It's an interesting man, Abram. He's originally called Abram.
Yep.
Later changed to Abraham.
He's not done anything, right? He's not said, God doesn't say, oh, this is a righteous guy.
He's not a special guy. No. In fact, he comes from a family who make idols to sell to other people to worship those idols.
Yeah.
So it's literally the guy who is like promoting anti-God.
And he doesn't even know this God.
He doesn't even know God. Yeah. He has no concept of that. Yeah. So he's, can't hold that against him. He doesn't know anything about God. But why would God choose this man to start the family of God? It's such a funny...
I think it's an interesting question, but I also think when you look back at it, it's that also an idea of you could give praise to God because it wasn't through Abraham, that anything was done. It wasn't through his own ability. Like he didn't have anything special that set him apart, that made him like, oh, yeah, definitely got to choose this guy to
I guess
represent.
That's encouraging for us because
God
chooses us.
Yeah, God chooses us to do things through, to make a change in the world. Not because we're doing anything amazingly special, like we're special in God's eyes, but like, there's nothing that amazing about us that, we definitely have to have Will do this.
Yeah. Was it Corinthians says God chooses the foolish things of the world to outsmart the wise? I think it's just part of the nature of God is to take what people see as insignificant and turn that into the significant one. And I see that. I think about my own story. I grew up in a small town, rural Queensland called Warwick.
I believe it was called Warwick.
Warwick. It's a funny place. I lived on farms. it's probably 10,000 people in the town.
Yeah.
And then I move from this small town where, I was in Toowoomba a little bit, but basically I was in this small town. I moved from that to the largest city in the world, in Tokyo, to plant a church. And I'm just thinking, I'm sitting in Tokyo at a crossing with like thousands of people all around me. There's more people in this little like crossing than in my town that I came from. And I'm thinking, God, why me? Of all the people that could go and plant a church in Tokyo, Japan, why me? And I just think it's just I don't know if it's the humor of God or just like he loves to do these things to show people. It's me who's the great one. Yeah. I can take anything and make it great.
But that's the whole I think that's the purpose, right? It's like, I can take the ordinary and make it extraordinary.
Yeah.
Because I have the power of it. There's that Christian joke about if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans.
Right.
I think, I've seen that in my life where I'm like, I'm going to do this, this, this. And then that's how it'll go. God's like, not so today, much. Sunshine.
Not so much. That's why 5-year plans. Yeah, I mean, go for it. But
don't be flexible.
Don't be surprised when it doesn't all happen the way you think. So, family of God, he gets this. It starts with a promise. Do you want to read that?
Yeah.
Genesis 12.
So Genesis 12:1. So the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kin, and your father's house to the land I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." And so that includes us, right? We're families of the earth. And so God's taken that singular person who previously these people were righteous in the eyes of God to this abstract person that nobody knows who it really is. He's not righteous in the eyes of the Lord. He's taken that person. He's going to use that person to slowly grow them and get them to the position that they are. And that the whole story of Abraham and starting to grow that family is building trust. That's what families are about, right? Is trust.
It's a key word, trust or faith.
Yeah.
Trust God. Yeah. So he calls him to this. That's a pretty dense scripture right there. You could preach a series on that scripture.
The land I will show you. Not even like, I'm not telling you the place. I'm just going to show you at some point.
You find out when you get there. And I guess it kind of makes sense because he would have traveled a certain distance and the world was not necessarily mapped out like Google Maps. I'll just zoom into that place and I'll see if there's a pit stop here. It's kind of like pioneering.
Yeah.
Just go out there. There's going to be a place which you will call home, but you're not going to know it until you see it. And I'm going to show you. You just got to trust me.
Yeah.
And by the way, you don't know anything about me. So how does God even speak to him? I don't know.
I have no idea, right?
God finds a way. I think that's a good part. Good.
I reckon I think he would speak to us in a way that makes sense to us.
Yes.
Or something that we would believe when we hear it, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Like he speaks to Moses out of the burning bush. Ali was actually telling me, she used to work fly in, fly out in Queensland. There are bushes that just go on fire by themselves. Right. And so to Moses, that wouldn't have been like a crazy thing. Obviously the voice comes out of it. That's
and also he would have been around when they were worshipping, was it Ra, the sun god? Would have spoken out of a fire. That kind of, it would have been some cultural things there that made sense for him.
So you'd assume that God would find something in the ordinary that people relate to speak out of and into to make us understand. Because he uses the tools of the world. He does. To bring us on that journey. And we see that later on as well.
I always find it interesting when people say, God doesn't talk to non-Christians. I'm thinking, have you read the Bible?
How do they become Christian then?
God literally finds people who have never heard of him, speaks to them and calls them to lead the family of God.
Yeah. How did he speak to anyone pre-Jesus then?
Exactly. And even now, like I saw that again in Japan, like people reading the Bible who don't know anything about God, and there's a sense of God is speaking to me about my life right now, and I want to, and They will tell you that I've heard from God.
Yeah. And also, if you look at people who convert from Islam to Christianity, a lot of them have dreams and visions.
That's
Significant
true.
dreams
Yeah.
of Jesus Christ
Yep.
correcting them. And you can tell it can't just be just a dream that they have that's just like, oh, fade away. It's something that really powerfully changes them because they change the whole direction of their life. And going from Islam to Christianity is a major thing, especially when you live in those countries.
Oh yeah.
And so much so, people don't refute it when you've had a dream of Jesus. Like the imams and things like that, they don't say, oh, you couldn't have had a dream. They just tell you to be quiet about it.
Right.
So
So
yeah,
God is desperately trying to speak to people, lead
really is,
people,
isn't he?
like yelling out at you. Romans 1 says that all of creation is kind of like yelling out at you. I'm here. I'm good. Follow me. So he calls Abram. We don't know how, but he speaks to him and says, I'm going to take you to a place that you don't know.
Yep.
And then he gives him this kind of interesting promise, which is he wouldn't have even known this at the time, but it was basically the same promise that Adam and Eve received.
Yep.
Same story. Totally disconnected people, in one sense. And then he's saying, I'm going to use you to bless the whole world.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
Weight of responsibility, right? If you fully trusted it, that is.
Big responsibility. Yeah. And why would he leave all of his stuff and go and actually follow that?
And leaving his family, right? So he's leaving
Yeah.
the household as under his father's protection, basically. And he could have been heir to his father's household as well. So that would have been a lot of riches.
I left my country. I did this, but honestly, like it wasn't that. That was before Google Maps. That was before some of the things. It was 2003, was it? 2004? So it's pre some things. But honestly, I got an aeroplane.
Yeah.
And
I left home at
arrived.
16 and joined the armed forces. It wasn't like a massive, right, I'm off on an adventure.
Yes.
Yeah, it wasn't too
Wasn't
difficult,
like the
was it?
pioneers or something. But man, that's a big step of faith.
Yeah.
To go and do that. I don't know. Maybe he didn't have it very good where he was, and he wasn't leaving much. I don't know.
Well, I think he was a bit older. He didn't have a kid, didn't have a child, didn't have a son, didn't have an heir to his household. So maybe there's part of it where he's like, well, got to do something. There's a cuneiform, like it's a clay sort of bit of writing that actually talks about where Abraham's from,
Okay.
and how it was destroyed later on. So maybe it was, pre that, and they had the idea that, things are going to happen here. So maybe it was like, well, I might as well get out.
Interesting.
So that could have been, again, that's God's timing.
Yep.
So maybe that's what led him to move on. But he certainly sort of went for it, right?
Yeah. So he leaves. And what happens next?
So he goes down. Then after a little bit, there's like a famine, goes down to Egypt. And so this is his, not a first testing really, because he doesn't really know how good God is. He just knows he's been given a promise.
Right.
And we don't hear too much story about what God's doing in him until then. So the famine, they go down to Egypt. Then he's worried because apparently his partner's a looker. So she's quite good looking, and he's worried that, they're going to kill him to take his wife. And so it's the story of, she's my sister.
My sister. It's such a weird story.
Yeah.
He does it twice, right?
Yeah, he does it twice. But also, it's not like a full-on lie. Not as like a sister as we would think of, like my sibling. It could be like cousin, second cousin, that sort of thing.
Okay. So you're allowed to marry your cousin back then?
Yeah. We still can in the US, right? In some place.
Not Tasmania.
Yeah. Probably is. Yeah. Still the web fingers, right? People are turning off the podcast right now. So yeah, he's not fully lying, but he's been deceitful, and he definitely thinks he's on his own.
Yeah.
And so then, some bad stuff happens to the Egyptians because of that.
Yeah.
Like, what have you done? What have you done?
Yeah. Isn't the king who gets really angry at him?
Yeah, I don't think he's happy because he knows that something's going wrong there, and it's because of this.
Yeah.
And so it says here, the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarah. So, yeah.
So God is trying to protect this family
Yeah.
at all costs.
Well, he also wants to make sure that his wife doesn't have an illegitimate son. So I'm trying to say it as nicely
Right.
as possible, because then if Pharaoh had given that child, then it's not Abraham's child, and therefore that lineage is under scrutiny. So the writer here is trying to show us that God's protected it to keep it, to make sure it's Abraham's child, and it's fully in line there.
Yeah. So God promises him a family, but he has to go through a bit of a process to get that family, and there's a lot of trust
Yeah.
that happens. And then he does, and he even tries to make that happen in his own strength.
Yeah, so before they make a covenant.
Yeah.
So God makes them a covenant. And there's an interesting piece where they like cut up some animals, some pigeons and things like that. And then Abram goes into a deep sleep. And then this fire torch, goes through in between the animals. And that's God's representation of himself. And so what's interesting there is in the ancient Near East, there was a thing called a blood covenant where both parties would come to an agreement, and they would both walk through these sort of cut in half animals.
Yep.
And the idea was, if I break my part, let this happen to me. And so you'd be speaking a curse onto yourself if you failed your end of the bargain. But what's
High
amazing
stakes.
here is it's only God that goes through.
Right.
Abraham doesn't do anything. Only God goes through. So God's saying, I am promising on myself to do this.
Wow.
This will happen. And I'm not even asking anything of you yet. He's not asked him to do anything apart from just go to this land, just travel around, have a bit of trust in me. And so what an amazing view
Wow.
that God does all the work. He did all the work in Genesis after the fall. So the first thing that he did, where are you? He put the hand out. Where are you, Adam? It's like calling for them. Come out. I'm looking for you. It's not as if he didn't know they were there. They know.
I thought that following God in salvation in the Old Testament was about following the rules, and salvation in the New Testament is about doing whatever you want because you have grace.
Well, I guess like Old Testament, at this point, there aren't any rules. So like Moses hasn't come down from the mountain yet. So there's God's grace right there without us partaking in anything. And doing what you want, I think that shows that maybe you've not really fully received the Holy Spirit within you, because the Holy Spirit does make a change. That's not going to stop you from sinning. We're still going to fall. Philippians 1:6. And so, but it's about that wrestle within you. It's that sort of, the more of the Holy Spirit that's in you, the less of the world that I want to infect makes it, I don't like it. I don't want to do it.
I guess what I'm trying to get to is it's the same God.
Yeah.
Same way through the story. It's the same. So his nature is the same. His attitude towards us is still the same. He's the one initiating.
Yep.
He's the one redeeming. He's the one giving the grace. Salvation, or being made whole, being made fully human again, eternal life that he gives us is by grace. It's not, it's the same thing. Abraham didn't do all of these wonderful things. It was God who came down in that fire and said, I am going to do these things for you.
Kept blessing.
It's a pretty big risk that God's taking, that because we may not reciprocate.
Yep.
But he's still forgiving us. He's still offering that to the whole world. Jesus' sacrifice on the cross was not just for a few special people. It was for the human race.
Imagine
and
doing all
of
that,
creation.
knowing that people were going to reject you and hate you and spit on you still.
While you're doing it for them.
Yeah.
While
It's easy to
it's
sacrifice
crazy.
for the people you love,
Right.
and the people that love you, that's, it's not that bad. It's not that hard. You sacrifice for your family. But to sacrifice for someone that hates you, that's a real tough thing.
Literally.
And God's doing that straight away there
Yeah.
with Abraham. I promise this will happen. And that's the promise of all the nations will be blessed as well. That's that the promise is getting bigger. The more Abraham chooses to trust the Lord, the greater the promise gets.
Wow. Incredible. So he does try to make that promise happen himself.
Yeah.
Not that we would ever do anything like that today, but he does try to make God's promise happen himself.
Well, And the thing with that, right, is he does try and make it happen in his timing, I would say, rather than God's timing. And so there's the episode with Hagar and Ishmael. Now to us, we'd be like, oof, that's terrible. Like, you've got a mistress now, you've married another wife, and you're going to have a kid via her. But in the ancient Near East, that was actually an acceptable social norm. So Sarah is actually saying, well, I'm going to have a child through the proxy of Hagar. So childless couples actually were doing that in the ancient Near East, and it was acceptable that child, so Ishmael basically would have been Sarah's.
Like a surrogate.
The way people, that's the way people would have seen it. And so it wasn't, to them, they weren't doing the wrong thing.
Right.
They didn't think they were doing the wrong thing. They were like, well, God's promised us a child. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am.
So is
I've
this
actually got a
God's
child now.
stamp of approval on polygamy?
I would
Multiple wives.
If I would keep reading, and you'll see no.
Okay.
Because a lot of trouble comes from it, right? This is what happens when we take our timing and we do what we think's right rather than what God wants us to do.
This is also a key, like a little Bible interpretation lesson. Just because someone did it doesn't mean that God approves of it. God still meets them where they're at, even though he doesn't. That's not God's design and best, but he still meets them where they're at, even though they're in the middle of that, and takes them forwards. You got
if it's good, we know it's good because God will say it's good.
Exactly.
This was good. This was good. This is my son who I truly love.
Yes.
And so it's not as if God's silent all the time and doesn't speak. So we know what he thinks about things. If he's silent on it, he's not approving of it.
And we get to Jesus, the only thing that Jesus said about marriage. He only said one thing that we know.
Yep.
It's recorded in Matthew chapter 19. It is that he just reaffirms Genesis chapter 1 and 2. He just says, male, female, joined together. This is God's design for humanity, for the human race, for the same go and multiply through the whole earth. And he says, good. That's good.
This is the way it
Go
should
that
be.
way.
Yeah.
Focus on that. Stop. And that was in the context of people just wanting to divorce Will. Because they probably did see someone else. I divorce you. I'm going to skip over there.
It might be looks, but it also might be for that social power, also for riches and things like that. So you take on the wife's possessions as yours for the family.
Yep.
And so, there's a lot of reasons why they did it. But that's not what God wants from us. That's not his plan.
Okay. So don't get caught up in that story. Man of God makes a mistake, not living God's best. He's got 2 wives now, tries to make it happen. But eventually he does get a son.
Yeah.
Isaac.
Yeah.
Who's the child of promise.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, though, after that, this is one of my least favorite stories in the Bible. One of the weirdest stories. It really trips people up. And he has this idea that God is asking him to sacrifice his son. Now, it's really weird because other cultures are sacrificing children and God is judging them for it. In fact, we'll see it a little bit later. God sends the Israelites to attack this other group of people because they are killing all their children.
Sacrificing to Moloch, right?
To Moloch. Yeah. And God's saying, no more of that. God wants to wipe that off the earth.
Well, that's the Canaanites, right? That's still in Canaan.
Yes.
But as you read through the story of Abraham, he actually says this is again, you have to really look at it, but it starts to say that God doesn't actually destroy Canaan there. He gives them time. It's not their time yet. They're not ready to go.
Yeah, we're going to come to that story. We'll dive into it a little more. But the point is, God doesn't like child sacrifice.
No. But I think this is a good story. I quite like it.
Yes, you do.
And for the reason being, there's a couple of reasons. Again, it's building that trust. It's Abraham being able to fully trust God, but it's also Abraham having trust in his own faith. So, those like weird icebreaker exercises that everyone hates. And it's like, you stand on the stage and we'll hold hands and you fall back. Trust exercise. And it's
Have you ever done? I wouldn't do a trust one with you because you're like 6'4" and a big guy. I would probably drop you.
I have done them before, and I've like hated every minute. I don't like these things.
I can imagine.
But yeah, it's to show you like, oh, you can trust that we'll catch you, and so you're never going to let the person fall on the floor. And so in this, God's never going to let Isaac die. Or if he does, he's going to be brought back to life. And that's the way Abraham looks at it. He knows through the whole story is slowly building up more and more trust in God.
Yeah. Can you guys hear that truck going past?
This is the bin truck.
It's like backing in next door. We are in like an industrial zone.
What a perfect day for it.
Yes.
But it's for the whole story, it's building that trust more and more and more. So the point where Abraham knows that the promise is going to be fulfilled through this son, this Isaac, this chosen
So he's confident
son.
of that.
And so therefore he knows whether the knife falls, takes him out, God will bring him back, or he's going to stop me, or whatever it is. It's that trust is granted as righteousness to him.
And doesn't he
faith.
say before he goes up the mountain,
He says we'll be back.
he says, we'll be back
I'll be back.
in that voice.
Yeah, 100%. You've seen the movie and everything.
So he's fully confident he's coming back with his
Yep.
son. I think that's important to note.
Yeah. Although for his son,
He
it would
didn't
be
tell
it
his
might be a
son.
different story. You're also carrying like the sticks that you're going to get burned on. It would be quite difficult for your son. Like as Isaac going up the
Yeah.
mountain, there's no sacrifice. I'm carrying the wood. Dad's got the knife and the fire.
So, and he doesn't ask, what are we going to...
Yeah, God will provide.
God will provide.
Gives him the look.
God will provide. Trust in God. So we see this interesting comparison of the Canaanites with Moloch, and they're sacrificing their children at will. And then we get to this story where God is going to differentiate himself from that.
Well, also with the Canaanites, they sacrificed to get something.
Yes.
Whereas also the way God asked Abraham to take Isaac, it was quite a gentle, loving way. Can you please take the son that you love, your only son? God's already given Abraham part of that promise. He's already given him the son.
Yep.
And so there's that trust there. So yeah, it's a lot different. I think Abraham would know at the time. He was fully trusting in God at that time. That's like the tick of approval. Well done, you've passed the test. You've gone through.
When I was born, I was really sick and I was going to die. The doctors expected me to die. And at that time, my mum had a real spiritual encounter with God, disconnected to any church, any Christian influence, just had this encounter with God herself with a Bible that she had laying around. I was born very sick. She prayed, and we're in the ambulance, and she's praying this prayer. She's reading the book of Luke. She doesn't know any Christians. She's praying this prayer, God, if you save this boy, I'm going to give him to you. You can do whatever you want with him. You will be in control. And then she said later on, when I moved to Japan, she regretted praying that prayer because I said, I'm going to move to Japan. I'm going to go plant churches. In a sense, I'm going to leave the family.
Yeah.
And she said, God reminded her of her promise to God. No, you said you're going to hand him over to me. And they went through years of maybe, turmoil and whatever.
Yeah,
Similar to
through
this
that
story.
decision.
Similar to this story, there was a lot of mistakes in my
Yeah.
family and what have you. But then we got to this place where it was like, no, God's promise was fulfilled and her promise to God was tested, and she had to say, yes, I'm going to give him over to you. And obviously we're here today because I went.
Yep.
I think that's probably a more modern day example of similar to this story.
And that's within that's what God can do within one generation and one person.
Yeah.
So because of the prayer your mum made, the promise that God gave, how many lives have changed and been changed because you were then able to go over to Japan and spread his kingdom message? And so I believe God's will get done in one way or the other. It's whether we want to partner with him and be a part of that or not.
Yep.
So, without that promise and there's still more to do, right? There's still more work to be done.
Yep.
And so if your mum had said no, then people would miss out.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
often people are blessed when we choose to trust the Lord.
That's a great
It's a
point.
blessing for others.
Yeah.
And so, are we stealing that blessing from
Yeah.
other people when we choose not to follow?
I've heard you talk about this a little bit, like the decisions that you make. You've encouraged newer Christians in our church. The decision that you're making right now is going to bless your children and their
Yeah.
children. There's a generational blessing that's coming.
And I can see that in my family. So my mum and dad are the only Christians in our family. My mum and dad chose to give it all up to follow Jesus, sold what they had stored up, and dad went to Bible college to become like a minister. And so they gave up comfort in this world to follow the Lord. And because of that decision, well, here I am today, being able to follow Jesus and know about him. Because of their example and their choice to say yes. And so we go back to Abraham, because he chose to say yes right at the start. We're all changed.
Yeah. Yeah, powerful. So God doesn't make him kill his son.
Yep. Stays the knife, right?
Always going to be the case, but he comes through right at the last.
And one of the
moment.
amazing things about that, right, is on that occasion, a man was asked to sacrifice his son, then didn't have to, and God provided a sacrifice through the ram. Long time down the road, God
Yep.
was asked to sacrifice his son.
Yep.
At this time, the knife wasn't held back.
Yep.
It went through, and blood was given over for us. And again, God provided that sacrifice for all of us.
Yes.
And so I think that's, when you link those two things up, I think that's absolutely amazing. And it shows you that the God of the Bible is not some sort of moral monster that likes to impose his will on others, that he's always fighting and working through us to actually redeem us back into the family. And that family started there with Abraham,
Definitely.
as we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, like when we talk about God and the Son, it's an interesting concept because we tend to think about it in terms of our human, like no matter how bad things get, there's no way I'm giving up my son
Yeah.
for you. And that's not what God's asking. It's interesting. We talked about like the Godhead as him being,
Yeah.
he is God. It's like God giving up part of himself,
Yeah.
his son, for all of humanity.
Yeah, I think, the Trinity, and part of that's a really difficult one to talk about. I think a lot of people, there's going to be things that we don't know about God because we're just humans, right? We're not meant to know, we don't need to know, and it's not really going to change anything if we did know. But there is that idea, the Godhead, then there's Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and then part of the Son, there's sort of two parts to that. There's the human nature and then the divine nature.
Fully human, fully God.
And so the human side probably wouldn't know all the things that the divine side would do. I heard it best, I think someone said, it's if you can see and you put some goggles on, it's you're choosing not to see. And so maybe that's what part of the Trinity is actually doing there. It's putting up that veil and saying, I'm choosing not to see what's going to happen. I'm choosing not to use my powers because I know that's part of that divine dance of actually reconciliation.
I'm delegating that to
the Father.
To the Father to know.
Yeah.
Interesting. Because Jesus actually does say in the Garden of Gethsemane, he says, not my will, but your will be done. Right? And which is interesting because
and that's probably both
he is
the
God.
human. That's probably the human side of Jesus, and also I would say the divine person of the Trinity of the Son, also saying, to the Father, your will be done.
Yeah.
And again, going back to that divine dance where they're all doing it for the other rather than for themselves.
I think I said recently something like, if someone tells you when the end of the world is, Jesus said, I did not know, that's for the Father. And I saw a couple of confused faces because I'm saying Jesus is God, like he should know when the renewal or whatever that event is. that in people's mind. The end, which is an interesting concept in
Yeah,
itself.
like
we're going to
the
get to
pre-mill, post-mill, R-mill thing.
yeah, exactly. But it is like that. That's a beautiful picture of that. He's delegating that, or it's one God, but three
It's trust within those
trust within that. Yeah,
separate persons, but one person sort of
Yep.
idea, I guess. Like we have no idea how that works.
Yep.
Maybe that's just what happens when you are so trusting and loving of another. You more
Yep.
or less are one.
Yep.
And so, like, I have no idea. I know.
Yeah, exactly. So roles and responsibilities within
Yeah. Yeah.
that relational oneness.
Trusting each other to fulfill those roles and
Yep.
responsibilities too.
Yep. Like today, it's the Holy Spirit working on the earth. Not sure how we got onto that, but I just wanted to make clear about the son. Like, don't think of it in terms of, if you're a parent, I'm going to kill my son for other people.
God's never asked us to do
It's not that picture.
Yeah. And that story there is probably more of a testing for Abraham to believe, and that's what I was saying about to have faith in his own faith. It's quite easy to say, oh yeah, I believe like this car will not crash.
Yeah.
But then it's not until you drive it, for example, that you know it's not going to crash
Yes.
on you. Or I believe, again, when I joined the armed forces, they made us go to this respirator testing facility. We used to have another name for it, but I won't say. And they would gas you, right? And so you're with your sort of, you go in, you haven't got your gas mask on, they'd like set these like CS pellets off.
To see if the equipment works.
Yeah, and it'd be like gas, and you have to put your mask on, and like this is called NBC training, nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare training. And so it's so you've got faith that this like mask's going to protect you when you breathe, and then you do a few drills, and then I'm pretty sure that like you don't really need to do this bit to have faith in your equipment, but what they make you do at the end is you have to take off your respirator and actually breathe in this gas, and like. It's like burning your eyes, burning your lungs, like you're just spitting and all sorts. And you have to like say a few things and ask you questions. And then you're allowed outside and like you're standing in the window or whatever, try to get the stuff off you. But it's so, they say it's so you have faith in the equipment you have. So you don't have faith unless you know that it works or what it's like not to have it. And so that's the part of that faith journey there in your equipment. And so maybe this is the part of that trust. Abraham can then trust what God says is true. He can trust him.
Yeah.
In his own internal self, sort of.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Totally. And remember, he'd never experienced Eden.
Yeah.
He'd never walked with God in Eden. He didn't see what the plan was. Take this place, and he didn't. He was like dropped in the middle of that. Yeah. All this chaos.
He's living in a cruel world.
It's going to get better.
Yeah.
So. Interesting. Okay, so he has a son, Isaac, and then Isaac grows up. He has a son.
2 twins.
Twins. Interesting part though is, okay, they're twins, and very different boys.
Yep.
Any parent knows is you're going to have 2 different children, but very different, and they do represent some things. In the Bible narrative, they do represent some things. Esau, naturally more of a manly guy, and would have been to me, is the natural choice.
Well, he also came out first.
Yep.
And so with twins, they whoever comes out first, that's the oldest. And so that's how they would have said, right, you're the heir to the family.
Yep.
But yeah, it's interesting. You said, manly guy, but also, I guess a man that wants to be a part of the world. He likes to go out hunting and things like that. That's all he cared about. He didn't really care about his family and things. That's his desire was to be out in the wild.
Yes, and his brother ends up getting God's blessing.
Yeah, and so Jacob was more of a mummy's boy, I guess.
Mummy's boy. He
and
was
so Isaac and Rebecca. They favoured their kids.
Yeah.
So
he was a homebody.
Yeah.
Liked to be indoors.
Doesn't want to get burnt by the sun.
Cooking.
Yeah. Soft skin.
Yep. Interestingly, in that day, you wouldn't see that as a good thing.
No, Because you're not a protector, are you?
No. So he's probably has more feminine traits or feminine characteristics than his brother, who's very masculine characteristics of that day. Yet God blesses this guy to take the family forwards.
And I think that's partially because Esau didn't want that responsibility. Again, this is another show of someone rejecting the authority they'd been given. So
True.
the blessing should have been Esau's. He should have therefore taken on the heirship of the family to look after the family. It's not just like a nuclear family of the kids and the wife and that's it. It's actually the whole
extended family,
your kids' families and all that sort of stuff. It's your responsibility then to look after this whole group of people. And that's not what Esau wanted. He just wanted to go out and do stuff. And he wanted stuff of the world. Oh, just feed me. I'm starving to death here. Feed me.
Yeah.
And you can see how little he cared about it because he was willing to give over that blessing for a bowl of porridge, I think it is. That's what he thought about that blessing. That's what he thought about God's blessing, because it's not just a blessing from the heirship of the family, and it's actually carrying on that blessing that came from to Abraham. So he didn't care about it. Like, oh, it's just worth some porridge to me. And then Jacob takes advantage of this and says, well, I'll give you this if you give me the blessing.
Yeah, he manipulates his way into that position.
And then again, he manipulates his father into believing that
he's a manipulator.
Esau. Yeah.
I mean, manipulative guy. Not a great representation. Like the writer's saying this guy is not, he's a deceiver. He's not a great guy. But God still is so gracious. Again,
through humanity.
Chooses him, blesses him, even though he's such a deceiver.
And he's got some lessons to learn, right? I think
he's got some big ones
One
coming
of the
up.
funny things as well, though, is that he deceives his brother, but then his uncle deceives him. Later on in the story, there's that parallel.
Yeah, and that's intentional.
Yeah.
I mean, the writers are saying, you live like this, that's what you're going to get.
But there's a couple of things there. He gets deceived there by his uncle, but he still hasn't learnt to care about his family or care about the order of things. So he wants the younger daughter. That's who he sees and that's who he desires. But in that day and age, that would have been like quite dishonorable and disrespectful, because that meant that there's the older daughter just left behind. She's going to be an old spinster. And so really what should have happened, they didn't marry for love. Maybe love happened later, but they married because of that's how you take the family on and things like that. So he should have really gone for the older daughter, but he just wants to do it his way. And
Classic. Yeah. And then one of my favorite stories in the Bible is when he wrestles with the angel of the Lord or God or whatever that picture is. But it's a pretty cool story. It's a weird story in some ways, but I really connect with it.
That's where he finally earns a blessing. So previously, any blessings he had, it was through deceit.
Yeah.
And being a trickster. But when he wrestles with the Lord, he's actually, I'm not going to let go until you actually bless me.
Yeah.
I'm actually fighting for this. I actually desire this. I actually want to earn it in my own right, sort of thing. And so he's finally given a blessing that he can truly say is actually his.
Well, I kind of read it as him finally surrendering to God as the blesser. He's the recognition of it's God. You are the one. I want you to bless me. Rather than trying to manipulate others around him to get what he wants.
Yeah.
He's finally in this, albeit like this crazy relationship with God at this moment, but he's looking to God for the answers in his life, and he's surrendering to it. And I was in the book UMS of the World, I told the story about the first time in jiu-jitsu I was rolling with this black belt, really, really super nice guy. Jiu-jitsu is a little bit different than some other martial arts, like karate and stuff. They just hand out the black belts. Sorry about that, guys.
Superior sport, are you?
Wow. Who invented the UFC?
I'm just so glad to see how humble you are. It's really good.
No, I'm about to be humbled on this podcast. I can tell you. It's probably 10, 12 years of training until you get that black belt. See this. So I'm rolling with this black belt, and I'm just trying to beat him. I'm new. I'm trying to fight this guy, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
He's just like, he's not even breathing. I'm like so hard. He's not even breathing. He's like just choking me, armbarring me. Like it's like so easy. He's just on my back, and then I realize I don't even know how he's. All I want to do is just like tap every minute. I'm tapping. I don't even know why. He's not even trying. It's embarrassing.
Yeah.
And so we get to the end of it, and I have this conversation. We're sitting on the mats, and I say, "What am I doing wrong?" And he says to me, "You're trying to beat me, and you won't."
Yeah.
So he said, "I'm trying to help you, and you're trying to beat me.
Yeah.
How about you work with me, and then you can learn some rhythms, rather than trying to beat me. It's never going to happen." Is what he said.
A great display of like confidence and humility there, right?
Exactly.
I'm humble. I'm trying to help you.
Absolutely.
But
confident.
I know you're not going to win.
Yeah. And you see, this is the picture of like and obviously with God, the gap's even bigger. But just to say that gap was so huge. It was so obviously huge. And God was saying, whenever you're ready to work with me, you can tap. I've been blessing you this whole time, by the way.
Yeah.
I'll give you a blessing. It's not like I'm holding back. But it was his response to God of like, finally, you're the answer. And finally, I realize I can't deceive anymore. Like, I've got to be honest. And he comes out of that place with this marked forever. God touches his hip as a reminder. Never forget. You rolled with me one time. You went on the mats with me one time. You were never the same. I think this is true for a lot of young guys. A lot of young guys who are like, want to be tough guys.
Yeah.
And then they come to this place with God where it's just like, God, I surrender.
Yeah. I've tried everything else. I've
can't
tried the
do it.
world. I've tried to do everything to satisfy myself and realize,
There's a young guy in our church got baptized recently. We both sewed into and you spent a lot of time with. And he had tried everything in the world.
Yeah.
And he was at his lowest moment. And we were like, probably he needs a bit of a spiritual kick in the butt to say, dude, this is the moment of your life where you can say yes to God, or you can keep being that Jacob.
Yeah.
You can keep being that guy, or you can surrender to God and let him bless you. And
it's
let him change
amazing
you.
to see what happens when you actually say yes to the Lord.
His whole life has changed.
Yeah. And what a blessing to us to be able to witness it.
So good.
Like, I think it's amazing to, I get the pleasure and the honor of being able to do alpha courses with people. And so some of the stuff that I love about that is just seeing that little light click in someone's mind of like, oh, God does know. Yeah. And starting to follow Jesus that way. And I think, it's a great way to be blessed. It's by seeing transformation in others. But so Jacob sort of finally gives up, gets a popped hip.
Yep. Old man.
Yeah. And then he's reconciled with his brother as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's another picture of family reconciliation. So he's a bit worried when he knows Esau's coming. But, I wonder, it's not part of the Bible story, but surely God must have been doing a work in Esau's life.
Sure.
Because he's not come out all angry and he's happy to see his brother.
Yeah, amazing.
Be reconciled.
Yeah, God's still on track with his family plan. He's not quitting on it.
Yeah.
And then he has a son, but he's making some mistakes again.
Yeah. And so, again, this is a deception back.
Yeah.
Another deception. That you've reaped what you've sowed there, Jacob.
Yes.
But he, as his mother favored him, he favors
Joseph.
Yeah. And so Joseph shouldn't have been the heir by right.
If some people would know Joseph, Prince of Egypt.
Technicolor raincoat.
Yep.
And so he's decided.
So how many sons does he have? 10 or 11 or something? 12. He has 12 sons. Joseph's the youngest. He loves him the most. Is he the youngest?
Yeah.
Second
he'd
youngest?
be the youngest. Second youngest.
Second youngest, because there's
He's
Benjamin.
the eldest son of Rebecca? Rachel?
Yep.
Rachel.
Maybe Rebecca.
It begins with an R. We all make mistakes.
Not like this is like a
names.
Bible podcast. Or
Yeah,
anything.
there's also that. And I'm really bad with names, so. But
Good with faces.
yeah, and maybe also we should mention then that Jacob is Israel as well. It's the same person.
Yes. Okay. So that can be confusing.
Yeah, that's where we
God
get
changes
the
his name
Israelites.
to Israel.
Yeah,
Now it's starting to make sense.
Yeah.
The country today, it's all from this guy.
Yeah.
The deceiving guy gets changed by God. Favors his younger son.
the
Second youngest son. So his Benjamin is younger. Is that
Yeah.
right? So he's got.
So it's the eldest son of his favorite wife, basically.
yes, he's also got a favorite wife, and he hasn't learnt
No.
multiple wives.
And he hasn't learned from his mum and dad because they had the same
Trouble.
problem. And so everyone knows he's the favorite son.
Yeah.
He gets the easy jobs. All the other boys are out in the fields looking after the sheep. Judge's at home, living it up. Gets a really nice jacket, which is like a sign of you're the one. You're gonna take over the family. And so for the other brothers, this would have been a worry because
Kind of a slap in
is
the
he
face.
going to look after my family? Because that's his job, right? His job then is to look after his brothers
Yeah.
and all the families underneath.
This young kid.
Yeah. This young upstart he thinks is amazing, who's been loved all his life, given all the easy jobs, never had to do anything, gets a special coat, comes out to them in the field
Yeah.
and like,
And he gets double.
Yep.
He would get double inheritance
double
because.
portion.
And the reason for that is because he needs to take care of others. It's a practical reason. But
And then what's he do when he
Yeah.
comes out to his brothers? Lords it over them. Oh, I've had this special dream.
yeah, guys, see if you can interpret it for me. You guys are all bowing down. Like, what do you think that would mean? Like,
There's some bales there, and then like there's one that just stands up straight, and the other ones just bow down to him. Like,
yeah, all the bales have your guys' names on them.
yeah.
I'm like this big one in the middle, and you guys are bowing down to me. Like, can you guys help me? I don't really understand the dream. Like, what do you think it could mean? I'm the greatest?
Yeah, I'd say he's not a good guy. Like he's a spoiled brat. Like I think our Western view of Joseph
We are, yeah.
is that
We romanticize him.
yeah, this guy just went out on his own. Like his brothers hated him, just jealous of you. Went out, lived his best life, overcome all these hardships, and then became like second power in Egypt. Wow, that's going to be me. It's not, because you don't want to go through all the other stuff either. And all that stuff he had to go through was some humble pie.
Massive. humble
Before
pie.
you can do the Lord's work, maybe you need to follow the Lord and be humbled. So yeah, he's a great story. And that also talks about Jacob. Jacob should have been like stamping this out. Sort of dad's letting this
Yeah.
go on in the family.
Not great. And I guess maybe they're trying to kill him because they don't trust him to lead the family.
Yep.
They don't want him to be the leader.
Yep.
I think let's get rid of him now for the sake of maybe saving all our
Rest of us,
families from
yeah.
this guy being
Yeah.
the leader and like driving us into a ditch.
Yeah. And so, yeah, you can see why it happens. And thankfully for him, he wasn't killed. He was just thrown in a pit and then sold. Another interesting archaeological fact is that the amount they sold him for was actually the right price of that day and age when people were being sold. So that's another way you can sort of prove the historicity of biblical content is when you match it to events around those times, as well
Yep.
as names that were used at the time.
Yep.
But yeah, so he got sold off, sent to Egypt,
Goes to Egypt.
but blessed, believe it or not, by handed over to Potiphar. So he wasn't just like thrown into a rubbish family or building a pyramid.
Somehow he lands in a really
Good job.
good deal. God's still gracious to him.
But I think, I was reading about how you can tell he's probably still looking down on others with the incident with Potiphar's wife. Now, Potiphar's wife wouldn't have ever been alone. She's a wealthy woman, so she would have her sort of handmaids and things like that around her all the time. So everyone would know that he didn't do anything. We look at it, it's like, oh, what a righteous dude, like running away. But we're missing how he's probably treated everyone else. So he's alone. He's not like obviously working together with his fellow servants. So he's not making any friends.
Yeah.
So none of them stuck up for him. And then for the honor shame side of thing, Potiphar has to make a choice. Like, does he trust his wife? And if he rejects her, that means he could reject all the riches of the family that he was in and things like that.
Yeah.
Or does he go after and believe Joseph? Since none of his fellow servants are sticking up for him or vouching for him.
Sure. You can't really put too much blame on Potiphar. I mean, he did what he had to do there. He went to prison.
Yep.
Joseph goes to prison. So the path to his ascent is prison.
And this is where he's starting
You sure you're signing up for this?
Well, yeah. Well, this is actually, you could say, we look at in today in our Christian world, but people have hit their lowest point and then God rebuilds them from there. This is likely Joseph's lowest point.
Yeah.
And this is where he allows the Lord to actually work through him, where he's actually interpreting the dreams. The first guy gets out.
It's the first time his dreams are not all about him.
Yep. And and he starts to help people. And so, he finally comes to the ear of the Pharaoh. This guy can tell you what dreams mean.
Yeah. Which would have been like he would have had people employed.
Yep.
That were specialized in
fortune telling or
dreams and all of this stuff. So it wasn't uncommon. I guess what was uncommon was how accurate it was. Yeah.
And then a great thing through this is part of the original blessing from Abraham. You will bless the nations.
Yeah.
There's a mass famine, but because God has given this dream about starting to harvest and keep some stores because there was a big famine coming, people were blessed. The nations were blessed because there was food to be had. People didn't die of starvation.
Yep.
Made Egypt rich.
Yep. And the nation's blessed. Yeah.
And then his family come.
Okay, so we're going to see a reunion. This is coming to the end of this this section of the Bible, of this family drama, huge family drama from Abram to Joseph. And so he's now second in charge, basically the prime minister of the country.
Yep.
His family are struggling. They're in need. They think he's dead.
Yeah.
And they come to get food, to get help. And if you've seen the cartoon movie, it's a pretty powerful reunion. And Joseph says in chapter 50, verse...
I have to look it up. Like
somewhere. It says, you intended this for
harm. You intended this for evil. God intended it for good.
But God intended it for good.
And I think that's such a powerful saying, right? Because, trying to find where it is. So, 19, and, his brothers are worried. But Joseph said to them, do not fear, for am I in God's place?
Wow, okay.
As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to him. So what they were worried about at the start of not being looked after, he's saying, no, I will look after you. I'll take my responsibility on now properly and actually care for you and your families.
Wow.
And also, everyone's been blessed because what you've done. You've done the wrong thing, but God, that doesn't spoil God's plans.
Yeah.
He can use the situation.
So even though his father shouldn't have chosen him, God still worked with that.
Well, God works with what he's got. So it's pretty awesome, hey?
It's so good because God is working with us as well.
Yeah.
And I love what he says there, am I in the place of God?
Yeah.
Finally, he's come into the place of humility, of once again allowing God to be God and embracing his image and image bearing and presence carrying and responsibility to go and spread that to the whole world. So it's come full circle all the way around again.
And then right by the end, I think this is a perfect wrapper when you look at 12 to 50. Close towards the end there, it says, Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham. So it links it all the way back to that original promise, and where we're going forwards from there. And what a comfort to us. Like you said, God works with us where we're at.
Yeah.
And slowly does a transformation in our lives.
Yeah.
Slowly softens our hard hearts to follow him. It's not a all one hit where you just fall over and fail. And so that redemptive story is there for not only our families, but also for us in the family of God.
Yep. So if God's calling us to humility, my pastoral advice is don't wait to go through the prison and everything else. Just say yes to God now and be blessed.
Yeah. Save a lot of heartache.
Yeah. Not that you won't have troubles in life, you will. But there's a hard way. I believe there is a harder way to get to the same place that God has intended for you. And let's humble ourselves before God, put God in his place. The result will be great families. And God hasn't given up on his promise yet. We're going to see it in the next section. We're going to see the Exodus from Egypt. And then we're going to see them come into a promised land. It's going to be a real battle to get there.
Yeah. But it's cool. Well, it's cool for us to read about.
It's an incredible story. We're going to see a lot of God's character revealed. And it's going to be pretty powerful. So we're going to deal with some of the most challenging parts of the Bible in Exodus, some of the ones that really hang people up on following Jesus, which it should not. But we're going to jump into them, not shy away from them.
No, there's a great book about that. It's called Moral Monster by Paul Copeland, who addresses a lot of those Old Testament things of, God's so terrible.
A Moral Monster. Great book. I actually saw this book, around a fair bit recently, people referencing this book. So if you haven't read that, we'll put it into the resources section as well. Thank you, Will. Appreciate you, man.
Thank you.